Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and you know, there's so much in life we take for granted, hardly notice. Not only big important things like the people in our lives and the kindnesses of others, but the little things all around us. We tend to give them no notice at all. So here's one. If you happen to have traveled to Israel, visited Israel, between 2015 and 2017 by plane, and you landed at Ben Gurion Airport outside Tel Aviv, did you notice there's a voice on the airport's PA system welcoming us to Israel? It's a wonderful voice that somehow conveys not just welcome, but welcome home. Well, that voice belongs to a person who happens to be an extraordinary person, who comes from an extraordinary family, a kind of royalty of Israeli history. The man behind that voice at Ben Gurion Airport is the great-grandson of the iconic Eliezer Ben Yehuda, who virtually, single-handedly, revived spoken Hebrew by creating the modern Hebrew language. And if that's not enough, the voice belongs to the grandson of Itamar Ben Avi, the pioneer of modern Hebrew journalism, and the son of Moshe and Drora Hovav, founding members of Israel's public radio. But it's not just his yichus, his lineage, which is stunning. He is stunning in his own right, playing a major role in creating world-class Israeli cuisine. He's the author of a series of best-selling Israeli cookbooks. He's been the creator-producer of many of Israel's most beloved television food shows. He's a world-traveled best-selling author who not only writes about the joys of cooking and of eating, but also tells the story of his amazing family history in the land of Israel. It's my great pleasure to welcome to JBS the man who's done all this and whose voice you might have heard when you set foot on Israeli soil at Ben Gurion Airport. Gil Hovav, raconteur, food aficionado, author, lecturer, who currently devotes his time and energy to his publishing and production company, Toad Communications. And Gil's most recent book, as he joins us on L'Chaim, is entitled Candies from Heaven, a charming story, collection of stories of what it was like to grow up in Jerusalem in the 1960s and 70s. And no surprise, it also contains, amidst these stories, a melange of mouth-watering recipes. Gil, it is fabulous having you at this table. Thank you for joining us on L'Chaim.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's the warmest welcome I ever got, I must say. Thank you very much. I'm flattered.
Thank you. I'm flattered that you'd be here. There's so much I want to talk to you about. I want to begin, though, a little bit with your own personal history. You were born in 1962 in Jerusalem?
In Jerusalem, yeah.
Okay. And your great-grandfather is Eliezer Ben Yehuda.
Mm-hmm.
We'll come to that in a moment. I want to know, however, more about who your parents were and the kind of Israeli/Jewish home you were raised in.
So I'm not a regular Israeli because all of my grandparents were born in Jerusalem. So it's not a story of Aliyah. They were all born in Jerusalem, let's say in the turn of the century, between the 19th and the 20th century. I'm from very mixed origins. I'm half Yemenite from my father's side. And from my mother's side, I'm a quarter Belarusian, 1/8 North African, and 1/8 Spanish.
And Eliezer ben Yehuda goes through
Is
whom?
the Belarusian side.
Yes,
From my
of
mother's
course.
side. And I grew up in a very secular upbringing. And, but, you know, it's Israel, so it was very Jewish, but
Yes.
it was secular.
Yeah.
You know, going to synagogue was rather rare when I was
Yes.
growing up.
You know, there's a common, I don't know that it's a misconception, but there's a sense that the Sephardic Jewish community tends to be more involved in Judaism, ironically in many ways, than Ashkenazi, because the Ashkenazi Jews who came, the Ben Gurion group that came over, while they were steeped in shtetl and Yiddishkeit, it was only the Bible for them.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't want the Jewish tradition, they didn't want Jewish practice. But many of the Israelis now who came from Arab countries and Sephardic countries, they had a different connection to Judaism. So it's interesting for me to hear you say, although your father has a Yemenite tradition and your mother Ashkenazic, in your own home they were perfectly comfortable being the classic secular Israeli, and you know from your travels and your experience, a secular Israeli is very often more observant than a conservative or reform American Jew. But talk to me a moment about why you think it was that on both sides of your family there did not seem to be involvement with synagogue life.
Yeah, well, from the Ben Yehuda side, it's very clear Ben Yehuda was persecuted by the ultra-Orthodox community in Jerusalem. He was really...
You should explain why. It's a very important reason.
For two reasons. One was that they thought that Hebrew is supposed to be a sacred language,
Lashon
not to be
Kodesh.
used to go to, God forbid, the toilet or the bedroom or the bank. And secondly...
So they were annoyed that he was creating.
Annoyed is a weak
spoken
word.
Enraged.
They would throw stones at him. They killed my grandfather's dog. And Eliezer ben Yehuda buried the dog in the yard, and he wrote on the tombstone, "Here lies the first Hebrew dog." And they told the Turkish rulers of the country at the time that he was a British spy, and he sat in jail for a year for that. They refused to bury his first wife and his 6 children who died in a Jewish cemetery. And up until today, because they said that his shikutz, he would bring...
Isn't that outrageous?
Well, the story goes that when he died, you know, we already had a family plot on the Mount of Olives, but they said, no. We cannot put the body of Ben Yudke, the crazy, in this Jewish cemetery. So, and then there was a big outcry in the diaspora, and what they came up with was a solution that they would build a fence around his grave. Jerusalem was conquered in 1948 by the Arabs, and when I was growing up in Jerusalem, there was a partition in the middle. We would see the Mount of Olives on the Jordanian side, and the Jordanians built the Intercontinental Hotel on the Mount of Olives, and they used tombstones from the Jewish cemetery as building stones. And we would see the cemetery, you know, being taken apart, but we could always see the fence that surrounded the burial plot of the Ben Yehuda family. They didn't touch it because they said this must have been a very important sheikh, so we won't touch it. So it's because of the Neturei Karta who persecuted Eliezer ben Yehuda that his grave was saved.
That's very lovely.
So he was really anti-religious. From my father's side, it's different. I think Yemenites were the most easygoing Jews, the most easygoing Jewish community. And though my father came from a very religious family, his father was a script writer, like writing the Torah, and the Sofer Stam, and he was in the synagogue. It was very big. All of his 7 children became secular, and he was very comfortable with that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Was there Shabbat in your life at all?
Not really. You know, Shabbat in Jerusalem is always wonderful, and it feels blessed, and it feels magic, but not in the Jewish religious sense. We were totally secular.
Okay. You were born in 1962, correct? Okay. So in 67, you're only 5 years old. Do you have any recollection of that period of time?
No. You know, people always ask me, where are you when you're writing your books? And they don't mean where do you sit. They mean where are you mentally. And different authors have different answers for this, and some of them don't. I have a very clear answer. I'm on the first day of the SixDay War in the kindergarten. We hear the first siren. There is no shelter. Bombs start falling on the roof and on the fields around us. There are fires. The kindergarten teacher, one woman with 50 children, no shelter, just lined us against the wall because the wall felt safer. Then there was an all clear siren. She rushed us to her home because there they did have a shelter. But I panicked and I didn't want to be there.
It was frightening, wasn't it?
It was dreadful. You know, airplanes in the sky dropping bombs on Jerusalem. I remember myself running home alone, a 4-year-old kid alone in an air raid, seeing balconies falling off houses, smelling the fire and the gunpowder in the air, running home, hysterically running to the second floor where we lived. It was locked. To the first floor where my aunt lived. There was nobody home. Then running to the shelter, seeing my mother standing frantically, half in, half out. Where are the children? I remember what she wore, like an orange pantsuit and green earrings. She saw me, she hugged me, and she said, "All is good, little angel. You're home." And it's to this very moment that I'm still running. And it's about that I'm always writing. It doesn't matter whether it's a story about childhood or a recipe for hummus. It's always about seeking this hug and knowing that everything is good.
It gives me chills, Gil. That's an amazing story. You said her children. How many children did she have?
I have an older brother too, so she had 2 children.
Where was he?
He was in school, so...
Did he make it home safe?
My aunt ran out and rushed him over from school home, but there was a minefield between the school and our house because Jerusalem was, you know, the border. So they ran between the mines, and then there was another air raid, so they just put his school bag on top of their head and said, well, if we make it, we do, and if we don't, we don't.
And he did.
He did, and my father, who wasn't with us because my father was the news announcer, my father, talking about voices, he was the voice that announced the liberation of Jerusalem.
Oh my goodness.
And there's a story in Candies from Heaven, there's a story about my father getting word in Tel Aviv. The bunker of the IBA, of the Israeli Broadcasting Authority, was in Tel Aviv because nobody knew whether Jerusalem would survive. They got word that Jerusalem was liberated, and he had to read it. And he said, no, I'm sorry, I'm not reading this from Tel Aviv. He got in his car, he drove to Jerusalem, he broke into the studios of the IBA that were locked, and he read from the Bible. He read the prophecy saying, you know, Od evnech v'nivnet, etc., etc. And it was his voice that said, Dover Tzahal Modia, the army spokesman announces, Jerusalem has been liberated, the Wailing Wall is ours.
That's extraordinary. That was your father.
Yep.
And again, you're 4 or 5 years old, so it's not like you have a vivid memory of it.
Every single second,
Just
I remember.
Do you remember your father on radio?
Of course. My father, both my father and my aunt. My aunt was another news announcer, and she was giving orders to soldiers.
Okay. Do you have nightmares about the event you described where you ran home?
No. Strangely enough, no.
Do you have dreams at all about that?
About that? No. No.
Okay. So this is a waking image for you.
Yes.
It is a very present, immediate, waking image. Yes?
Yes.
And you say you carry it with you all the time?
Every single second of my life. I'm there. I'm just there running up the alley, seeing my mother, rushing to her arms. And then I remember the rest of the war, It was the 6-day war lasted only for 4 days in Jerusalem because Jerusalem was liberated. After 4 days, for 4 days, I was sleeping on a suitcase in a shelter. The shelter was very, very small. 40 people crammed in the shelter because we had a good one. So the neighbors came to be with us. There were not enough beds. So a 4-year-old kid was put on a trunk, on a suitcase, and I slept on it.
Were you scared then?
Yes, but I don't think that I saw the broad picture. It's very scary because bombs are falling on your house. I mean, you hear the explosions, you smell the smell. My cousin was in the army. We all feared that something might happen to him, God forbid. But thinking about my parents, the border was 20 meters away from our house. There was a tank parked under our apartment.
Were you near the Mandelbaum Gate?
No, we lived near what is now the Jerusalem Theater.
I see.
So there was a wood there, and the wood was an army base. And this is why the Jordanians bombed it so much, because they saw that it's army.
So you lived right along the border.
Yeah.
Do you remember what it was like? The war is over. Whether it's day 5, 6, or 7, it doesn't matter. You're no longer in the bomb shelter. You're no longer on the suitcase. And a virtual wall between East and West Jerusalem is gone. And Har Habayit Biyadenu, right? The Temple Mount is in our hands. At some point, did you get to go to the Kotel, to the Western Wall?
So, this leads to another story. We did go the day after the 6th day of the 6-day war. We did go to the old city. Nobody did. We did. And why? Because before the war, right before the war, Israel wanted to start a television service as another means of communication with the citizens. So my father, who was a very important news announcer, was sent to England to study television. And there he befriended a Jordanian guy. Nobody knew Jordanian. This was the enemy. But, he spoke Hebrew. He spoke Arabic, my father, because he grew up in Jerusalem of the 30s and 40s. So everybody spoke Arabic. And the Arab guy spoke Arabic. And they were both away from home. And they became friends. Came the 6-day war. We're in Jerusalem. The Jordanian guy's parents are in East Jerusalem. He cannot get to them. The nearest he could get to was Cyprus. And the day after the war, he had our phone number. He called my father hysterically and said, go see what's going on with my parents. Maybe they're dead. Maybe they don't have water. Maybe. We got into the car, and we drove to East Jerusalem. And I remember driving through what used to be the Mandelbaum Gate. It was just... It wasn't taken apart yet. It was just in ruins, It was after a war. And immediately, when you passed the border, the scenery changed. You could see a devastated city. Burnt buildings, burnt cars, no trees. A city that lost the war. And
I'm sorry, which city?
East Jerusalem.
But not the old city.
First it's East Jerusalem,
Yes.
and then you get to the walls. They were living inside the walls.
The Jordanians, the
Jordanians'
parents were in the old city.
Yes.
Okay.
And we went to look for them.
And
he
you
gave us
knew-
an address.
Okay, so you're in a car.
In our car. Driving between, the burned tanks and now, we never think of it, but when you lose a war, what do? You wave a white flag, but nobody keeps a white flag at home, just in case you have to surrender. So they hung underwear on poles, on the roofs. And for me, as a 4-year-old kid, it was funny. Look, they're hanging out. And the most important lesson that I ever got from my father, he was holding the wheel with his left hand. He turned to me, and bam! He gave me such a smack that I just flew to the window. And he said, you will never, ever, ever in your life laugh at people who lost. Never. And if you would, this is only the beginning. And I keep thanking him for that. I mean, it was the best lesson that I ever got.
You're an extraordinary father.
Yes.
After the Six-Day War, again, in 67, you're 4, 5. Then you're 6, 7. Then you're 8, 9. Then you're 10. And as you become 10 and 11, you're living in Israel before the Yom Kippur War and in the afterglow of this stunning Israeli victory that changes, but wait, you understand, Gil, it changes world Jewry, the Six-Day War. And for a while, it looked like the Arab Israeli and the Jewish Israeli sort of were able to live together quite well and were friends. The story about your father and the Jordanian Palestinian is remarkable. Do you, as you grew up, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, did you have any Arab friends?
None. We had this Arab family that we really befriended, but if you're talking about the experience
Social
of-
intercourse.
nothing. Nothing at all. We went freely to the old city and you know, but two different peoples living in two different parts of town.
Okay, I want you to give me a reality check. My first trip to Israel is in 1970. I'm wide-eyed, okay? One of the things that seems to me is that if I'm in the old city, if I'm anywhere where there are Arabs, and we didn't call them Palestinians yet, Arabs, they seemed friendly. They seemed to be happy in Israel, that Israel was for them, especially compared to other Arab countries, a land of extraordinary freedom and opportunity. Was I romanticizing something and not seeing something under the surface? Were the Arabs who looked happy angry?
I think you were just like we were, naive. And I'm trying to be careful and not say vain. As I see it, when I look at people my age who are Arabs, not Israeli Arabs, but Palestinian Arabs, nowadays in Israel, I have a 14-year-old daughter. I wish the world for her. She would be the first female chief of staff. She would be the first female president of Israel, and she will. What can a Palestinian father except for his child? Palestinians, they have no future. None.
Why is that?
Because they cannot work in the civil service of Israel. They're not citizens. And because they're not accepted in Israeli society, and because they're different.
Are we talking about Palestinians on the West Bank?
Yeah, and in Gaza.
And in Gaza? Would you like to see a Palestinian state on the West Bank?
Of course.
Okay. Why isn't there one?
Once, I used to think that it was because of us, and then I was voting for the left. Nowadays, I think that it's because of both people, and I'm voting for center.
Have you moved politically yourself?
Yes, I shift to, God forbid I'm not at the right,
Yes.
but I shift towards the center from the left.
Okay. What I hear from a lot of Israelis now, who at one time were part of Shalom Achshav, Peace Now, and really saw themselves on the left, is a kind of disillusionment with what happened with the peace process and the Palestinian perspective. And there's a feeling that I have argued, you can tell me if I'm wrong, at one point it was at least 80% of the Israeli population would have been willing to give up the West Bank in a moment for genuine peace. I don't know if it's 80%, but I believe it's a wild, overwhelming majority, except that the majority of Israelis don't believe it's possible. And therefore, when somebody says, I'm not for the two-state solution, you have to really ask, are you not for it now, or are you not for it in principle? Most of Israelis I speak to are not against it in principle. They just say, we've seen what happened in Gaza. We see what the Palestinian Authority writes, preaches, teaches, puts on Palestinian television. And until there's, we see them paying to murder Jews, until there's a shift in the Palestinian leadership as opposed to Palestinian people, we just don't imagine there being a peace possible.
Mm-hmm.
But if there were, we would still be for a two-state solution.
Mm-hmm.
I don't call those people on the right. Those to me are centrists. I want your perspective.
I'm one of those. And, but I think that there is a shift which is problematic. I think that the issue becomes more and more religious. You have more and more settlers that say, no way we're going to give back, sacred lands in which the Bible really occurred. I mean, the stories really happened in Sebastia and in Hebron and here and there. I, as a modern secular Israeli, say, yes, I will give it back. And, but they say no.
Okay, but it's still a small percentage.
No.
Yes.
They're not. No.
No. Oh, please. If it's not 80%, as it once was, what is it now? That have, again, well, there are people who also, they see Hebron as a place of Jewish origin.
Mm-hmm.
They're still ready to give it up. They will get, like you understand what Hebron is in Israel, in biblical and Jewish history.
Not to mention that members of my family were assassinated in Hebron in the 20s.
Were they?
Yes, the Abu Shdid family from my grandmother's side. They had a house in Hebron and they were assassinated in a pogrom.
Okay. So you understand what Hebron is. You would be willing to give it up. I believe most Israelis are where you are. And that the number of right-wing religious fanatics, like in any society, are a small minority of Israelis. And they get inordinate amount of attention. And you come from a news-oriented family. You understand how the news can shape perception, sometimes in a way that's not accurate. I'm suggesting to you that the vast majority of Israelis, 70% or more, tomorrow, for real peace, they don't believe it will be real peace. For real peace, they don't care. They have it. Just live next to me like Canada lives next to America, and let us help you. The Israelis, do you hate Palestinians?
I love them.
Okay. I ask Israelis, especially young Israelis, time after time when I sit with them, do you hate Palestinians? People who go into homes, Israeli homes on the West Bank and slit the throats of 3-month-old babies in their bed. Do you hate them? No, they say to me. We distinguish between people who do heinous, cruel, demonic things and the Palestinian people. Gil, that's what I hear over and over again. And I believe that is the Israeli mentality. I believe the story you tell me about your father whacking you because you made fun. You didn't make fun of simply somebody who lost. It was an Arab Palestinian who lost. And you're a Jew living in Eretz Israel. And a Jew isn't going to make fun of a Palestinian or an Arab who loses a war. And when the Six-Day War is over, Yitzhak Rabin goes to the Mount of Olives and says Kaddish for the Egyptians who were killed in the Six-Day War. American Jews don't know that story, and they don't understand who your father was and the kind of world you were brought up in. And I'm saying to you that you now, as somebody who is a centrist, in America, you're called on the right.
Mm-hmm.
Because you are now skeptical of a two-state solution.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see you on the right. I don't see me on the right. I don't see the majority of strong, passionate Jews who believe there should be a state of Israel that lives in peace, and we will do what's necessary. But the moment there is an interlocutor who is serious about peace with us, there's nothing we wouldn't do for them.
As we say in Hebrew, מהפה שלך לאלוהים. From your mouth to God. If this is the situation, I buy.
You're very lovely. All right. We'll leave it there. Where are you in 1973?
I'm 11 years old in Jerusalem, hysterically afraid. And it's not, the war didn't occur in Jerusalem. You know, nothing happened in Jerusalem. It was far away on the border. But everything shattered. I mean, the dream that we are the strongest and that nothing can happen to us, suddenly, no. At least for the first 2 weeks of the war, we were losing. And not to mention that, you know, thousands of people were dying, of soldiers, etc. So it was devastating. It was devastating.
Where was your father then?
My father was in the radio.
He was?
Yes, it was Yom Kippur. I remember we were playing, again,
yes.
I don't come from a religious family, so we were just playing outside, and suddenly we saw my father going to work, which seemed strange. And then at 2 o'clock, we got a phone call from my father saying there's going to be, a phone call on Yom Kippur, there's going to be a war, prepare the shelter, and at 2:03 there was the first siren.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. The war's over, and lo and behold, the Arabs say they won, Egypt says it won. We understand it wasn't the kind of victory that is normally a victory. Israel was not, quote, defeated. At the same time, life changes again for you, does it not? In Jerusalem after 73?
I think we were a bit depressed, but the change was minor compared to what happened after the 67
Fair
war.
enough. What happens when Sadat comes to Jerusalem? Do you remember that?
Sheer elation. It was like the Messiah coming. And you know, before the Six-Day War, there was a period that was called the Fatah Hunt, the waiting period. I mean, for a month, it was clear that there was going to be a war, but we waited for it to start. During that period, my father was away in England studying television, and we were alone at home with my mother and grandmother with a tank parked under our house, etc. And we were listening, for some reason, we were listening to the propaganda transmission from the Egyptian radio. Kol hara'am mikahir, el-sawt as-sa'ika min al-Qahira, the voice of thunder from Cairo.
In what language?
It was in Hebrew. It was propaganda. So every transmission ended with the same 3 promises. נשמיד אתכם, נשחט אתכם, נזרוק אתכם לים. We shall annihilate you, we shall slaughter you, we shall throw you into the sea.
Which, by the way, echoes what Nasser was saying in 67.
No, I'm talking about 67.
This
was his promise.
Sorry. Thank you.
And, well, it didn't end like they were expecting it would end. And comes the visit of Sadat, and then we have peace with Egypt. And then my father, who was already the head of the IBA, gets a formal invitation to visit the Egyptian radio service. And he goes, and he tells me, I'm going to the office of the Voice of Thunder from Cairo. I'm going to open the door, and I'm going to beat the boop out of them. And I said, no, Daddy, don't. You know, we have peace, we have this, we have that. No, he says, they frightened my children. I'm going to hit them with these 2 fists. Okay. He goes, he comes back, so happy. And said, how was your visit? It was amazing. Cairo is so beautiful, and Egyptians are so funny, and such hospitality. No. I said, did you go to see the voice? Listen. I go in the corridor. Suddenly, a door opens. 2 elderly gentlemen in 2 shabby, grayish suits come to me and say, Moshe Hovav, you are our king. Our Hebrew comes from you. We are the south of Sa'ika. We said everything according to what we learned from you. So I said, did you beat them? He said, are you kidding me? We smoked a cigarette together and we're friends.
What a fabulous story.
Yes, so it just goes to show you that friendship is possible.
That is a fabulous story. So I said to you I was going to come back to Eliezer Ben Yehuda. I want to tell you the story that is classic, that's told to American Jewish kids. and then you tell me if it's true.
Okay.
Eliezer ben Yehuda is on the boat coming to Palestine with his wife, whose name I forget,
Dvorah.
Devorah. And he says to Devorah, from this moment on, you and I will only speak Hebrew. And according to the story, he would not speak to her again except in Hebrew. Have you heard the story? Do you know if it's true?
Ah, you're giving the PG-13 version of the story. Let me give you the R version, okay? Eliezer ben Yehuda and his wife get off the boat in Jaffa. He says three things. He says, from now on, my name is not Lazer Perelman. It's Eliezer ben Yehuda. Ben Yehuda, not the son of Judah, the son of the country of Yehuda. This is one. Two, I did not come to this land in order to sleep in Jaffa. I want to go to Jerusalem. That very night, they get on a carriage and they drive to Jerusalem. At the time, it was a 10-hour trip and a road infested with robbers and wolves and you name it. Three, we make a vow. We do not utter one foreign word on this sacred soil of Israel. And now comes the part that you don't know of. If anyone breaks the vow, the other has every right to pinch him or her. Years pass. Gil Hovav sits at his home, gets an email from a lady that I don't know, and she says, Mr. Hovav, I want to publish a book of my father's letters, my late father's letters, and in it there's a letter about a visit to the Ben Yehuda residence in Jerusalem. When you say residence, they lived in a one-room apartment in a building that did not have a staircase. They used a ladder. I want your permission to publish it. I said, that's very kind of you, but even according to Israeli law, if one side of the correspondence wants to publish it, it's okay, it's kosher. Says, young man, you want to read this letter before I publish it. I said, okay, send it over. This person says that he came to visit Eliezer ben Yehuda and his wife Dvorah. Sat with Eliezer ben Yehuda at the table, and when Dvorah served tea and cookies, he saw that both her arms were black and blue from bruises of pinches. He used to beat his wife. It's not a funny story. But he was a prophet. And prophets have special rights. And because of him, you are sitting in front of a proud Israeli who has a language and a culture and a sense of belonging. So maybe he did the right thing after all.
Marvelous story. One more thing about you, and it applies in some way to Jerusalem. You're very open about being gay.
Yeah.
You've been together with somebody for 20 plus years, yes?
29 years, but it feels like 30.
Okay, and your daughter's Naomi?
Yeah.
Okay, lovely. Describe for me what you think the Israeli public's attitude is to the gay Israeli community.
I think that Israel is amazing. I'm very proud of Israel when it comes to gay rights. Israel is a lighthouse. Of course, in the Middle East, but it's quite a rough neighborhood. But even if we talk about North America and Europe, all of my gay and lesbian friends have children, to the last one, all of them. And when we were living, Danny, my partner, was my officer in the IDF. We were both serving in the top secret unit of the intelligence service.
Which one?
8200, A200, like this. And when Danny was doing his postdoc in Stanford, we were living in San Francisco for 3.5 years.
He was your commander?
Yeah.
What was your rank?
I don't know how to say it in English. It's a major something.
Fine.
It's
okay.
the top rank that is not an officer.
Okay.
Danny is an officer. Danny is a big officer.
Okay. And we'll continue to just digress, like a footnote. What did you do?
If I tell you, I'll have to kill you. It's a pity. You have a pretty face. Let's keep you like this.
Is there something you can tell me in general without being specific?
Let's say that I know Arabic very well.
Okay, fine. Okay. And he was your commander?
He was my commander. But at the time, we were not gay. But, people could sense that we were. But,
okay.
but the intelligence service is extremely gay in Israel.
Is it really?
Yeah, and there's no problem with it. So when Clinton was elected, we were living in San Francisco, and there was this whole issue about gays in the army.
You come to San Francisco with him together?
Yeah, he was
Are you
doing
a
his
couple
postdoc.
then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. He was doing his postdoc, and I was being just a correspondent for Israeli newspapers on the West Coast, covering Hollywood. Anyway, there's this big issue of don't ask, don't tell. We look at one another and say, what's wrong with these people? I mean, what's wrong with being gay in the army? And you know, Clinton, in his own funny way, is trying to say one thing but do another thing. And I did have sex. I did not have sex with that woman. I will tell. I won't tell. What's wrong with you? The Israeli chief of staff, made it his business to come out with an announcement that in Israel, it's not that gays are allowed to serve in the army. They're expected to serve in the army. They're citizens, and this is what we do in Israel. Unfortunately, we do have an obligatory army service, and if you're gay, be like everybody else. Israel is amazing this way.
That's lovely. Why do you think it is that even in America, there were these issues and this feeling that gay is catching, and therefore you can't have a gay man in the army because they're bunking together, blah, blah, blah. You can't have a gay teacher because the gay teacher will somehow be more predatory than a heterosexual teacher, even though we have seen it's the opposite. Where do you think that comes from in America and in the world?
In mankind,
yes.
It comes from two things. One, from being afraid of what you don't know or from whatever is different from you. And another, our way of saying what we are is hating what we are not. Or is maybe not hating, but saying, well, this is not me. I think that in any case that racists meet the people that they come out against, they see that there is no issue there.
Yes.
And Israel, in this sense, is so laid back. You know, Israel, nobody cares. You know, be whoever you are, just don't take my parking spot. That's it. So in Israel, it's really, I won't say that it's not an issue, but it's not a big issue. And you know, I'm so openly gay. I'm as gay as Macy's at Christmas, okay? And you know, and I'm the voice of Ben Gurion. I mean, and you know, I'm the voice that blesses you when you come to Israel. So it doesn't matter.
Very lovely. We have heard that in Jerusalem, the Haredim are now, the ultra-Orthodox, are more upset with the gay Jewish community and have protested gay pride parades. You live in Jerusalem. What's the story there?
So I lived in Jerusalem. I live in Tel Aviv like everybody else now. But I did 25 years in Jerusalem. Because Jerusalem changed, and it's not livable.
For an average Israeli.
Yes.
You understand, it's still wonderful for the tourist.
I love Jerusalem. I love visiting Jerusalem. I wouldn't have liked to live there. It's too tense. It's, you know, Tel Aviv is the ugliest city in the Middle East, but it's so easy, and it embraces you, and it's ours. And Jerusalem, you know, you're just a tiny bit of the story in Jerusalem, and it tries to impose itself on you. So I'm trying to build my house elsewhere.
Fine. But answer the question about being gay in Jerusalem.
So it's a very complicated question. First of all, there were hate crimes when in the gay parades in Jerusalem, a young girl who wasn't, by the way, was marching but wasn't gay, was assassinated by an ultra-Orthodox Haredi person who already stabbed people in a gay march, sat 10 years in prison, got out of prison, and assassinated another. This is dreadful.
Dreadful.
For God, yes. But I don't think that it's smart to have a big gay pride in Jerusalem. And when I say it as a gay person in Israel, it's not always very well accepted. But I think that sometimes, you know, you have to respect the fact that people are different, and you don't have to do it in their face, in their face, in their face. And when I say to do it, I'm not talking about dancing, wearing a bikini. I'm saying that, you know, I have every right, I'm a citizen of the world, I have every right to be whoever I am. But, you know, a parade, may be too much for such a city. So I don't know. It's complicated.
In America, there's a lot of discussion about Israeli Hasbara. And Hasbara is an attempt to explain to the diaspora and to the non-Jewish world all over this planet the Israeli perspective. In America, in American Jewish life, you hear all the time, the reason why people don't understand Israel is Israeli Hasbara is terrible. Israel doesn't know how to tell its story. And the Palestinians have figured out a way to tell their story. I want your analysis. Is that criticism of Israel justified? And how do you feel about what is called Israeli Hasbara?
I think that saying that the problem is with the Hasbara is a bit naive. The problem is the Palestinian issue. And that has to be resolved. And you cannot do Hasbara for this. It has to be resolved. And you must have a partner, which unfortunately we don't at the moment. But this is the main problem, not the Hasbara.
Do you know that IBA had an English division?
Of course.
You know they closed it down.
Because?
Money. And the government felt that if the government felt it wasn't important enough. IBA did a daily newscast in English. We televised it on JBS every single day. American Jews and non-Jews who live here went out of their way to make sure they were watching IBA on JBS. And the Israeli government said, it's not important enough. I find that a terrible pity. What is your comment on this?
I think that, this is talking about a bit about in the depth of Israeli politics, but communications and the journalism in Israel, right now, this is under attack, heavily attacked by the right-wing government that we have. Our Prime Minister Netanyahu says that this is all fake news. Where did he get this expression from? And he wants to shut down the IBA entire. He says it should all be private channels. Why do we have to have an IBA? So the problem is a bit more than only the English service.
What would your father say?
He would plots.
Okay. Exactly.
But this is a different generation.
It
Israelis
is.
are much more shameless now. So.
All right. So I can't have you on without talking about Israeli food.
Let's do.
Okay. And, okay, is Israeli food more than shawarma and salad?
I'm very, very, very glad you said shawarma, because usually Americans think that Israeli food is about knishes and chicken soup, which you cannot find in Israel anymore. Israeli food is amazing. Israeli food is so rich. First of all, think of it. Israel is a nation of 60 different ethnicities jammed together in a tiny country. All of them, being Jewish, know that they know how to cook better than the others. So none of it is left. They all keep their traditions, and it all mixes together. Up until a few years ago, we Israelis would travel abroad, come back to Israel and say, why don't we have such good food in Israel? Nowadays, we travel abroad and we say, what is it that they're eating? Our food is so much better. Israel underwent an amazing revolution when it comes to food. In the 80s. In the 80s, yes. When we became rich, started to travel, wanted to indulge ourselves. Israeli food is amazing. It's a theme park of everything. It's so alive and happy and colorful and filled with sunshine. And it's really something to be admired. And it's very successful around the world.
There may be people watching who are going to be visiting Tel Aviv. What are some of the restaurants that you particularly like yourself or you recommend to others?
So first of all, if you keep kosher, a very, very, very good solution is the vegan restaurants. Now, Tel Aviv is the most vegan-friendly city in the world. It's official. And there are two very, very good, there are quite a few vegan restaurants, but there are two that I would mention their names. One is called Zakaim, and the other one is called bana. Super hip, super funky, super creative. You know, this is food that does not apologize. They don't say, we're vegan, so we don't do this, we don't do that. No, we're vegan, so we do this, and we do that, and we do that. And it's amazing. I'm not vegan, and I eat there all the time. So if you want to keep kosher, go vegan. There's everything in Tel Aviv. But in Jerusalem,
Yes.
one recommendation that I cannot skip, there is a super funky fast food joint serving Kurdish pastries that are called shamburak. Shamburak comes from the Hebrew word she mevorach, blessed. This is a pastry that is filled with the blessed leftovers of the Shabbat dinner. It's called Ish Tabach Shemo, and it's in the Machane Yehuda market across the street from the famous Machane Yehuda restaurant.
That's wonderful. One more thing on this area. Your family blended Ashkenazic and Sephardic. You know, for a while, all American Jews thought Jewish cooking was Ashkenazic, right? It was flanken, and it was kreplach, and it was chicken soup, and on
And
and on.
gefilte fish.
And gefilte fish.
Yes. No. This is God's punishment to Jews. It's clear.
And what about Sephardic cooking as opposed to Ashkenazic? Speak about that for a minute.
So I grew up on Sephardi food because my grandmother, whom, as it was put to us, she didn't live with us, we lived with her, was from Sephardi origins. She was half North African and half Sephardi. It was amazing.
What was it?
Rice and okra, bean soup, mjadara, which is rice and lentils. Yeah, very basic food. But ever since, I always say, you know, for 30 years now, I've been working as a restaurant critic. I write about restaurants. The best food for me is home-cooked food that comes from a pot with a lid in red sauce served by a woman over 80. This is what I live for.
Very wonderfully said. By the way, what about Passover at your home? You have a Seder of any kind?
Yes, of course.
Okay, and was it Sephardic or Ashkenazic?
It was sort of Israeli, you know? But you know, the mother of my daughter, of our daughter, biologically it's the daughter of Danny and a friend of ours. So the mother is from a kibbutz. So now, of course, we do the Seder. So once we had her family over from the kibbutz and we wanted to do, they have their own kibbutznik Seder. And we did it, which is, it's completely secular, you know, in the kibbutzim. So it's a Seder that God does not appear in the Seder, and it didn't feel right. You know, I'm secular. It's not that I need God at my side every minute, but it didn't feel right. So
That's fascinating. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Tradition is tradition, you know.
Yes.
Even if you don't believe in it, you want to have it.
Why candies from heaven?
It's a story. I'll tell you a short version of it. My father's family, they were Yemenite. They were super poor. A typical Yemenite family, 7 children, and very well educated. All of them married well, studied, you know. They were always taking care of one another. And as a kid, it made me feel very sure. It's very secure in the world because I always knew that someone, if I'm in trouble, someone would take care of me. And the first story in Candies from Heaven is about one of my aunts that during the austerity period in Israel in the 50s when people were dirt poor, she was a kindergarten teacher in a kibbutz called Revivim in the south, and she didn't have any candy to give the children. And the children were eating dung beetles, because dung beetles are a bit sweet. Not that I've tasted, but I've heard. And she was very upset with this. You know, her daughter, the first grandchild of a Torah scriber, is eating dung beetles. And her brother, who was the officer in charge of Eilat, the southern post of the city of Israel at the time, it was just a remote post, heard it. He was an officer, and he heard that his sister in Revivim is sad. He took his airplane, He flew over Revivim. He flew down very, very low, as he said, until I could feel the eucalyptus trees caressing the belly of the airplane. He took a sack of candies that he had, because he was an officer, he had everything, and he threw it on top of Revivim, and it fell like raindrops on Revivim, and he shouted, "Tell Daphna to give everybody. She shouldn't eat it by herself. And you, sister, don't be sad. I love you."
Oh.
And later on, he told me, years later, he told me, what does it mean to be an IDF officer? Respect, power, money, candy, everything. But first of all, Gili, it's to be a mensch. It's to take care of people. It's to see to it that your sister is not sad. And for me, it was a very important lesson. And again, it made me feel secure in the world. It made me feel that somebody is taking care of me. And it makes me, it gives me a sense of duty too, because nowadays I know that it's my responsibility to see to it that everybody has candy. So deep down inside, I'm very optimistic. I know that there would be candies from heaven. You know, things would be good.
בעברית.
הכל יהיה טוב. יהיו סוכריות מהשמיים.
You are fabulous. יוצא מן הכלל.
No, stop it. I love it.
I can't thank you enough for
Thank
being
you
here.
very, very much.
You are just so wonderful. Promise me you'll be back.
Oh, you'll regret this. I'm just like Lassie. They keep throwing her away and she comes back. Go away already, dog. No, she's back.
Gil Hovav, food aficionado, lecturer, publisher, author. Latest book about life in Jerusalem in the 60s and 70s, Candies from Heaven. It's available, obviously, in English at your favorite bookstore or Jewish gift shop. And, of course, it's on Amazon. And you've met an extraordinary human being. And it's been a privilege to present him to you. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to anything that Gil said on this edition of L'chaim. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook page, or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from many of you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.